It's Julia Oram, and this is my reading of The Fifth Musketeer. In the play The Fifth Musketeer by Paco Jose Madden, it tells the story of women rising to fight for what they believe in, and the main theme is defying women's role in the 18th century France. There are 3 female characters, and each defy society's role for women in their own ways, whether it's learning to wield a sword, fighting for a just cause, or betraying their husband to save other. That's supposed to be another. Each of the women find their own obstacles in 18th century society and push past them and become triumphant in their own ways. There's a moment in the very beginning of the play where the main character Cecil is described doing chores around the house for her father, Augustus? I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. With all your chores, taking care of chickens and goats, and your needlework, I'm surprised you aren't the one about to collapse. This was common for a woman in the 18th century to do household chores while men went out and worked or fought. In this case, Cecil is taking care of her father's home while he tries to do field work even though he's ill. This is in the beginning when Cecil falls into the role of an average woman in the 18th century France before she leaves to learn to wield a sword. In the chapter written about the status of women in France, it says the suppression of women was considered a necessity for society. The woman must stay at home in order to keep a man's house clean and raise his child. If all women left their homes and mixed freely with men, morality would suffer, and virtue and modesty would be lost. French men in the 18th century believed that suppressing women was important to keep their virtue and morality. In the story, there is a married couple named Rochefort and Rachel, and Rochefort is a soldier fighting against the rebels. Rochefort is a man with many sins, and because of this, him and his wife never consecrated their marriage, because he believes that Rachel needs to stay pure for his sins. You do want me to stay pure for your sins? Ah, yes. I wish you to remain as unstained and untarnished as our wedding night. And I'm sorry. In this time, an important role for women was to bear children, but instead the couple abstained from sex. Then Rachel is not able to bear an heir, which is important for family lineages. For a woman to carry out a man's sins would be a heavy burden and a lonely road for a woman, but it is often expected of women to meet the needs of their husband, no matter the request. There's a scene where Cecil runs into trouble with men at a bar when they try to grab her and threaten her with a little fun. Rape was a serious issue for women in this time, and is talked about several times throughout the play. The one drunkard who defends Cecil tells the men after they tossed her to him and then asks for her back, "Ah, I see you tossing women around like a sack of meal is some kind of sport." This brings in the idea of how women were viewed as objects or property at the time that men thought they could do with as they please. This play fights the idea that women are more than property or childbearers, but they are as strong as capable as men. In the 18th century France, many men viewed women as means for reproduction and not much else described in this chapter. While man was created to accomplish a variety of deeds, woman was created for one purpose. She lived solely for the multiplication of the species. Any deviation from this appointed destiny would be unpardonable shock to society, nature, and God. Though it was stereotypical for women to be just seen as moms, this play articulates the frustrations of women wanting to be more. The women in the story do not go down the path of motherhood, and they are still able to have a large impact on the conflict around them. During a scene where Travell is teaching Cecil how to fight, he forces her to think about the reality if she loses to a man. He says that a man will take advantage of her and ruin her if she were to lose, so she needs to learn how to win a man's respect. You must win a man's respect, and the only way to win a man's respect is to be better than him, to beat him. For if you lose to a man, he may take more than your life. Teaching a woman how to fight would have been against the typical rules, but with Cecil learning to fight, she learns how to protect herself against those who mean her harm. And this could have benefited many women in the past who have suffered from sexual assault. Cecil is a strong-headed woman who often speaks her mind and doesn't fit in well with the stereotype of women in the 18th century. One scene shows her wild side when she tries to attack Bonnieux, I'm sorry, I butchered his name, with a knife because he notified them that their rent is being raised. Cecil, still in her father's arms, demonstrates with a kitchen knife. Auguste waves back and forth across the room with Cecil as she wild swipes the air, barely missing Bonnieux, butchered again, I'm sorry, on more than one occasion. This is something that would be considered outside the role of women in 18th century France because attacking someone, especially a man of higher status, could have a serious consequence on a woman, but Cecil felt it was important enough to defend her father and pick up the knife. In the original story, there are 3 musketeers. The men are the heroes of the story, while women are the damsels in distress. In the play The Fifth Musketeer, women have a very prominent role as the heroes of the story, especially Travell, who became successful parading around as a man because it wouldn't have made much sense for a woman to do what she had done at the time. In the chapter An Exploration of Status of Women in Revolutionary France by Solina Gupta, it describes women in French society as females in French society were always hidden behind the men in their lives. This would mean the men at the time were the ones in power, and women were the ones in the background. But the women described in the play are the ones who have the power, and the men are described as weak or evil. At the end of the play, the conflict comes to a climax when Cecil goes to fight Rochefort after she hears about her father's death, but loses the fight, and he tries to rape her. Now you will pay with the price for your transgression, and feel what it means to be at a man's pleasure and disposal. Lowly men in the past would try to take a woman's virtue as punishment for wronging them, but for Cecil, thankfully, the assault was stopped by Travell, who turns out to have been a woman the whole time parading around as a man so that she could get revenge on those who wronged her and the man who raped her. And this, in particular, is important to the idea of defying women's roles in 18th century France because Travell was able to do vigilante work by fighting off those who do others wrong and train Cecil to fight with a sword as a woman, even though that isn't what society thought she should be. Each of those women faced different problems and in their own ways defied the roles of women in the 18th century France. Of all of them faced a man and did what they believed was right, and at the end of the play, this shows that any woman is just as capable as a man if they put their mind to it. And that is the end of that. After watching the video back and listening to my reading, I do believe that the thesis is stated in the first paragraph, though I may need to elaborate more on the main idea that I'm going for, and maybe articulate less on the situations that are occurring and more on the topics at hand. I think each paragraph supported my thesis. I think that I talked about all the characters and how they defined women's role in the 18th century and how 3 different women did it in 3 different ways. I think the last paragraph does summarize, but I don't think it summarizes enough. I think I need to make my first and last paragraph more evident. I feel I need to explain my main topic more and wrap it up more clearly. I also feel that there's a lot of parts that seem kind of patchy and put together, so I would like to add a couple more statements that make it more free-flowing and easier to read. There was definitely some spelling errors, which I'm going to have to go back and fix. But overall, I think it's a pretty good structure of a play, and I feel that if I refine just my main idea and getting my point across using strong vocabulary and having the sentences flow together, then I think I will be able to have a pretty good paper.